Today on the program, Steve's personal examples of law enforcement distress syndrome, the difference between LEDS and PTSD, and how you can help Steve.
Ladies and gentlemen,
They say the next big thing is here.
the Steve Warneke Show.
Hey everybody, welcome to the Steve Warneke Show. I am Steve Warneke. Thanks for being here. Lots going on over at stevewarneke.com. We've sort of excluded our civilian patrons as we've been concentrating on our law enforcement fans here. And we are collecting ongoing research for law enforcement to help improve the quality of life of police officers and help them work through some of the, unseen tolls that come with being a police officer. So if I was to ask you, which do you spend more time working on, your physical health or your mental health? Because we all do a lot of physical things. I think most of us eat well, we exercise, we go to the dentist, the doctor, right? We groom regularly. Most of us, right? So, but we know that we have one body for this life, so we work really hard to take care of it. And I think sometimes the tendency is to not work on an equally important part of ourselves, and that's our emotional and mental well-being. Thankfully, I had a mother that put me in therapy at age 5, so it's just been a regular part of my life. I'm in my 40s now, and I'm still going. I'm still learning. So I retired from a major city police department, the Denver Police Department, after 15 years of service. I was a sergeant. I spent much of the last 3 years since I've left the police department trying to work through some of the mental effects that I have noticed that being a police officer had on me. And it was easier to see them once I left the job and began to assimilate back into the civilian population. And then I started noticing that my police friends, those who I love dearly, are some of them still had some of these things going on, the same things that I was struggling with. And I was able to see it better now that I had some distance from it. And then I looked back over my career and even looked back at the book I wrote, and I could see these behaviors developing and in some cases getting worse. So this is why I've identified law enforcement distress syndrome. This occurs when a police officer begins to exhibit one or more of the identified 8 symptoms that I've named, and law enforcement distress syndrome results from prolonged durations of being under constant threat of always having to bear witness to evil, carnage, gore, victimization, crime, and so forth. There's a link at stevewarneke.com if you want to read the full article along with my hypotheses about it. So let me tell you my story. So as I mentioned, law enforcement distress syndrome became more noticeable in my life after I left the police department. Those symptoms were there, and what's sneaky about it is it just kind of sneaks up on you. It grows slowly like a puppy or a kid, and then pretty soon you look back at photos and you go, oh, they're so big. How did that happen? I mean, that's kind of what happened. And also, I was like functioning properly. And a lot of these, I'm hearing from lots of cops, they're still functioning properly. They're not, there's nothing wrong with them, but they're like, oh man, I struggle with this all the time. And cops do what cops do. They're very resilient. So they come up with a way to make this work for them. They find ways to cope and they get through it. And this is just what they have to deal with. But what I'm telling you now is after having been through it, I didn't realize how much my quality of life had deteriorated because of these law enforcement distress syndrome symptoms. And now that I've working my way through them, it's significant enough, and I'm getting enough response from police officers around the country that are already aware, even though they haven't left, going, yeah, I'm struggling with this also. Because this is for the cops who want help. If you're doing great, excellent, fantastic, more power to you. I'm not trying to push anything on you, and I'm just trying to help the people that want help. But so far, we're seeing enough people that they want to talk about this some more. All right, so what does law enforcement distress syndrome look like? So it became more noticeable after I retired, but these are some of the things that I would do and have trouble with toward the end of my career and after retiring. I had a harder time making friends since before I became a cop. I only had police as friends. I didn't trust new people. And when I did meet new people, it was like an interrogation where, they're telling me things and I'm like, does this jive with what they told me last time and with what I know about them? And I'm evaluating them like this is some sort of interrogation. And I'm it's not even like an interrogation. It's like, I know something's up with you. I'm trying to figure out what it is. So I'm going to find something, but I'm going to find it. And that was more, I mean, because it's probably good to be a good listener and be, alert, right? But I mean, this was different. So I was constantly on guard to determine whether or not everybody was telling me the truth, and this started to work its way into loved ones and family. Like, are they? I mean, not to a point where I'm crazy, right? But just to a point where you're like, yeah, I don't know if I believe that, and you're just cynical. Wait, if you're a cop and your family and friends go, man, you're so cynical, and just they're saying that to you, plant that seed, because if you're hearing that, and I was, then potentially that could be something that for you to look at. So these things that I just described, these are symptoms of antisocial behavior and distrust of others as they pertain to LEDS. Then we have the hypervigilance, which we've gotten people wrote me about. I mean, having their gun close by at night, clearing the house during sounds. I mean, checking on their kids to make sure they're still breathing if the kids aren't, awake at the exact time. And people are sharing these stories, but they're like, well, this is what I deal with, but I'm dealing with it. Well, I'm telling you that this research and what I'm doing, we're going to find a way to make that better for you. But hypervigilance for me, back to the wall at bars and restaurants. I felt uncomfortable on planes. I'm always developing a plan as to if something were to happen, what am I going to do? What do I have? What's next? Where am I going to go? What am I going to pull out? What am I going to say? And, a lot of cops right now be going, yeah, that's good. You're supposed to be doing that because we were taught that, right? We were taught you should go into a place and you should be evaluating whether or not anything's going to happen. You should have a plan. But what I'm telling you is, after these symptoms of LEDS begin to progress, in your mind, the likelihood that something's going to happen becomes far greater than it actually is. So yeah, something could always happen, and yes, cops off duty, you need to be prepared and stuff, but if this starts to consume a significant amount of your energy, if this starts to decrease the amount of enjoyment you have on vacation, or limit the number of places you are going, or limit the activities you want to do because you don't feel comfortable doing them, that's when I think it's important to say, all right, when I need to do something about this. If you're getting to that point, which I certainly was. So hypervigilance looks like those things: backs to the window, always on guard, always mentally preparing for some sort of violent response, right? If someone struck me as suspicious, I'm following them with my eyes, keeping an eye on them so I'm ready all the time. It's exhausting. Do you know the chances of this guy? You know how many times the guy at the grocery store actually pulled out a gun and robbed it? None. He didn't. I'm not saying it couldn't happen. I'm not saying to be on guard, but for the amount of energy I wasted on those times, because I was convinced that the likelihood of something happening was far greater than it was. All right, that's hypervigilance. One of the symptoms I struggle with the most, which is fatalistic thinking. And this isn't on surface, you're like, fatalistic thinking, and you tell people what it is, they go, no, I don't have that. And it actually took some digging for me to get to the fatalistic thinking. So it's difficult to detect on the surface. So here's what it looks like. I had high amounts of anxiety before vacations or traveling. I was very anxious doing things out of my comfort zone. I remember an innocuous snorkeling trip, just getting off the boat, and there were little fish only, and I put my face down in the water, and I saw the little fish around me, and I hadn't seen that before. But I mean, my physiological response that I had to that was ridiculous. I mean, you'd have thought I just jumped out of an airplane. I mean, adrenaline. I'm like basically hyperventilating into the snorkel, and I was like, I had to really work hard to calm myself down. Say, all right, this is just fish, something new. So that's what you go, well, how does that fatalistic thinking? Well, I'm going to get there, okay? So it wasn't just traveling. It wasn't just snorkeling. I was anxious about simple things like a boat ride. I barely got through a zip line in downtown Vegas. The only reason I didn't chicken out is because my boss was standing next to me. I mean, I literally was on the platform like, all right, right? I mean, stupid. This is stupid. Let's just go eat ribs. I mean, and I did not want to do that. I mean, I can't believe I even did it. But like the amount of anxiety, I mean, you get a little anxiety before ride. No, this was like crazy. And I didn't want to do, this is what I'm talking about, not wanting to do the events or having a really difficult time doing things. And this is after 15 years of law enforcement, you know what I mean? So it wasn't always that bad. So maybe you're not this anxious when you're trying to do anything. But if you're progressing that way, it might be time to say, all right, how do we work with this, right? So what I discovered was that the root of my anxiety was that in my mind went to the place where if things go badly here, if this ends badly, I'm going to be seriously hurt or killed. And in my mind, because I'd seen so many mundane daily activities end in serious bodily injury, gore, and death, I was convinced it could happen to me, right? Somebody using a table saw died. Somebody using a chop saw one time had a thing of a splinter. We just covered the ambulance through his eyeball, right? Lighting fireworks with your neighbors, we talked about last week, resulted in a double shooting and a death, and then somebody's testicles being shot off, right? Going to Starbucks, you get T-boned by a DUI. Walking down to the 7-Eleven, and you get run over, robbed, shot, stabbed. We've seen it all. And so what happens after years of this is you don't recognize why the anxiety's there, but in your mind, everything you responded to. You didn't respond to the millions and billions of mundane incidents that went well. You responded to the very, very few, less than 1%, that went horribly wrong, right? But that's what you get in your head, and you start to develop the percentage likelihood that this is going to happen to you becomes in your mind far, far greater than it is. And so you do overly cautious with safety things, and you withdraw from activities, and activities which should be fun, are anxiety provoking. So that's fatalistic thinking. And also I was paranoid, and not about aliens, but I thought people were out to get me as a form of revenge and vengeance. So it's revenge and vengeance paranoia. And, I moved out of Colorado after I retired. And, here's a great example of how this affected me later. There's a dog that lives on the street. He's just a shitty dog. And he jumped on me once, and I yelled at the owner, like, what are you doing? Because he wasn't on a leash. I'm just walking my dog down the street. My dog's on a leash, right? And then the second time he comes over, rah, rah, he starts, biting at my dog. And I hit the dog and get him away. And I'm like, come on, man, that's twice. What are we doing? You can't have your dog on a leash. But so I thought I'd handled it, I was sufficiently irritated. We had a discussion about it. Oh, I'm sorry about that. And I thought, okay. So then I leave town, and my great friend Kelly's walking the dog down the street. Here comes this jackass without a leash and almost kills my dog. Like literally tears like a gash like this in his neck. All right. Stitches, almost kills him. So, and I'm out of town. So I call the police. I'm like, this is the third time. And had a citation issued. He had to pay my vet bills. He had to pay a fine. The dog, right? The dog's on, double secret probation. They're going to gas the dog if it happens again. And I think I was well within my right to do what I did, right? I don't think a lot of people would fault me. The dog owners, by the way, were furious. Like, how dare you? That's not very neighborly. You should have come and talked to us. We're neighbors. And I thought, well, I did, and you weren't listening. And this got to a point where, the dogs almost died. So forget it, right? So, but afterwards, and they paid it, and they didn't threaten me or anything like so many people did on the police force, where I'm going to find you and kill you. I'm going to find your family and kill you, this thing. But you start to think, and even though if you were putting them in jail for legitimate things, they still said that to you, over and over, right? I mean, how many times did that happen to me in a 15-year career? Significant amount, really. I mean, I don't know, several times a year, I would imagine. But I got worried. I'm like, are they going to come try to get me back? Are they going to do something to my house, my dog? Throw poisonous things over the fence? Are they going to be, and I spent energy and anxiety worrying about retaliation from them. And that's revenge, vengeance paranoia. Even if your actions are legitimate, you're spending your valuable energy worrying and being anxious about something that you shouldn't need to be. And it wasn't that I couldn't handle it. It was just that I shouldn't be worried about that. I went down there and talked to them afterwards. They were mad, but we all said our piece. And, the likelihood of them spray painting my house, some 50-some-year-old people, is probably pretty low, right? But they may. So, but I spent a lot of time worrying about it. All right. So that's just some of my experience with law enforcement distress syndrome. And I have personally witnessed these symptoms in myself. I've witnessed these symptoms in others, and I've witnessed some of the other symptoms that I talk about in my document regarding law enforcement distress syndrome at stevewarneke.com that I've witnessed in others, some to debilitating levels. I've seen it go so far that cops have lost their jobs and their lives, I believe, because of, in part, law enforcement distress syndrome. Usually when I describe the effects that I've experienced with police work, people go, oh, that's PTSD. That's PTSD. Now, I did consult with a doctor on this. It is significantly different. Law enforcement distress syndrome is significantly different. The symptoms are different. There's some minor overlap in a couple of the symptoms, but overall, it's very generally different. And the main difference is PTSD is like one major traumatic event. I'm talking about, a constant barrage of bearing witness to gore and crime and victimization and death and accidents, and also having that constant threat, because police officers are under constant threat while on duty and oftentimes while they're off duty also. This develops slowly. This doesn't involve flashbacks necessarily. Now, you could certainly, and officers who've been through critical incidents could be suffering from both of these. So, that is a possibility. But what I've described here is different from PTSD, so it's not the same. And I've had three sets of people now that do PTSD work reach out that want to work with me on this project so we can collaborate. So maybe we'll do some of that also. So because there's 8 different symptoms and there's different severities of each symptom, some of them are mild, some of them can be severe depending on where they're at. It's impossible for me to explain how law enforcement distress syndrome could present itself in every possible scenario. You may have just a little bit of one of them. You may have a lot of 7 of them. I don't know. You may not have. So, the important thing is it's up to you right now as a police officer to say, yeah, I don't like the way this is going, so I want to work on this. So my research and what I'm doing right now, I'm trying to determine the scope of the problem. I'm trying to see if I have everything down that I need to symptom-wise, if I've accurately described everything. I want to come up with a diagnosis methodology for this. So I'm just making, I want to see about my hypotheses also, that the bigger the city and the more exposure to these things you have, the faster your LEDS will progress, and also the longer you've been on, you're more likely to exhibit some symptoms. So I'm determined to share what I've learned here. And, I think it would be a tragedy to go to the grave or to learn this and then just keep it for myself, because the men and women that are out there protecting us with their lives as collateral already do a thankless job, and they already sacrifice enough. And nobody in any training class or wellness education or the academy ever told me, hey, be on the lookout for these symptoms. And one of the things I'm trying to accomplish here is education, so that when you are on the lookout for these symptoms and they happen to you and you want help, you can reach out and figure out a way to start to cope, manage, treat, and prevent any further of these symptoms from going on. So my hope is really for widespread education. And I'm hoping that I can continue my work, come up with really good, solid treatment plans and support for officers that need it. So now that LEDS has been released, the response has been overwhelming. People are always writing me saying, how can I help? Let me tell you how you can help. Really, go to stevewarneke.com. There's several things you can do, all right? You can send me a message through my website. Just type me your story. Lots of people have done that. Your experiences with any of these. You can read it. If you know a cop, your husband's a cop, your wife's a cop, your kid's a cop, your dad's a cop, you can talk to me about your experience with those things. If you're in law enforcement or you're in former law enforcement, take the survey. stevewarneke.com. You'll see a link for the survey. And talk about it. Talk about it with each other. Hey, did you hear this guy in Florida is coming up with this like a PTSD thing for cops? And talk about it, because if it may not be affecting you, but if it is affecting somebody else, they go, oh, I need to look that up. And then we can start to figure out how we can help the police officers. And that's what we want to do here, is give back. Thanks for your time. Thanks for being here. I look forward to speaking with you soon. Everything over at stevewarneke.com. By the way, my book will soon be available on all kinds of platforms, so check it out. All right, be safe out there. Thanks for everything. See you next week.